Hello, class. Today we're going to talk about A Rose for Emily by Faulkner. I'm going to try to keep this under 15 minutes, but there is a lot going on here. We're going to cover four specific themes. We're going to look at the narrator, we're going to look at gossip, we're going to look at mental illness, and we're going to look at class. So let's get started first with the narrator. When it comes to the narrator, there are certain aspects that are interesting. First of all, this narrator knows a lot about the town and what's going on with Miss Emily. And there are other things that the narrator does not know. And so we're going to look at how that narrator has acquired the information and what is going on in the retelling of this story. So let's start with a couple of lines here. The first one is Colonel Sartoris invented an involved tale to the effect that Miss Emily's father had loaned money to the town, which the town, as a matter of business, preferred this way of repaying. What has happened is Miss Emily is not going to pay taxes anymore, and this is the narrator's way of explaining how the town has dealt with it. Now, in the way that this is explained, we get Colonel Sartoris, who has been dead for quite a few years. He has made this excuse for Miss Emily. And the narrator says, which the town, as a matter of business, preferred this way of paying. So he is a part of the town. He's a member of the townspeople. So that's one aspect of the narrator. Let's then continue. When the next generation, with its more modern ideas, became mayors and aldermen, this arrangement created some little dissatisfaction. On the first of the year, they mailed her a tax notice. February came and there was no reply. So we learn a little bit more about the narrator, and the narrator is from an older generation. He or she is from Colonel Sartoris's generation, maybe, or just after that. We notice this because we see words like on the first year they mailed her a tax notice. So the indication of they shows that he is not a part of this generation. So we get a narrator that maybe grew up with Miss Emily or knew the Griersons, but is not of the newer generation coming in. So how is the narrator getting so much information? What I think is that the story that's being told is a story that's been told year after year after year, and it has become refined or reshaped based on gossip. So the whole town is contributing to the story, but we get one narrator that is telling it based on all the facts that have been acquired. This is probably the same way that many people in the town would be telling this story. I know a lot of people have said this is a plural first person narrative, but I would say it is a combination of many first person narratives that's been, again, reshaped and tooled to this specific storyline that probably everybody tells. And there are some details that really show that there's a lot of gossip that's going on. For instance, when the Board of Aldermen go into Miss Emily's home, it is reported they could see that the leather was cracked, and when they sat down, a faint dust rose sluggishly about their thighs, spinning with slow motes in the single sun ray. This is not how a normal person would talk about going to another person's home with all this creative detail, with all this literary language. It seems more like a rehearsed story in which the narrator or the teller of that story is adding detail to make it more interesting to the reader. Or we look at the description of Miss Emily here. Her eyes, lost in the fatty ridges of her face, looked like two small pieces of coal pressed into a lump of dough as they moved from one face to another while the visitors stated their errand. To say while the visitors stated, so this wouldn't be coming from the visitor standpoint, and it's not from Miss Emily's standpoint. This is the narrator maybe adding facts or embellishing the story. The narrator wasn't there, And so, who is giving this information about her coal eyes and the lump of dough? This is something that is being embellished, maybe as it's told over and over and over. In addition, there are some aspects that are not known. We're not getting a lot from the manservant that lived with Miss Emily. And the narrator actually says he walked through the house and out the back and was not seen again. So we're not able to get details from his perspective, which means that this is gossip that's been collected over time from various accounts. But this is why the narrator doesn't know certain information, is because some characters didn't participate in this gossip. Another example of this non-participation in the gossip is when the Baptist minister went to visit. And the narrator says he would never divulge what happened during that interview, but he refused to go back again. We get this moment where the minister's going in to confront Miss Emily, and we never find out what happens. The narrator or the townspeople or the individual stories are being impacted by what amount of gossip is coming in and what information they're not getting. One thing I want to address then is what did happen when the Baptist minister went to visit. And this transitions into possibly her psychosis. It is indicated that there is mental illness that runs through her family. And maybe this is something that happened during that minister's visit, which shocked him. I don't know what he saw because, again, we're not getting that information. But I think we're finding that there's something off about Miss Emily. We see there has been a run of mental illness in her family. We look at this line here. That was when people had begun to feel really sorry for her. People in our town, remembering how old Lady Wyatt, her great aunt, had gone completely crazy at last, believed that the Griersons held themselves a little too high for what they really were. Here we see that she had a great aunt who went crazy. We see the relationship that she has with her father, and he scares away anybody looking to court his daughter, keeping her almost as a quasi wife. And that might have led to some of the psychosis or the mental illness that she's experiencing. Then, when her father dies, we see that psychosis manifest. She would not allow them to bury him. She wouldn't even acknowledge that he had passed. And we see this in this line. We did not say she was crazy then. We believed she had to do that. And they say that she had to do that, but this is not typical behavior. None of the other townspeople would have done that. And so they're not accusing her of being crazy, but they're seeing that there was some type of circumstance that led to this. And so they understand it, but that doesn't mean she's not suffering from this mental illness. We remembered all the young men her father had driven away, and we knew that with nothing left, she would have to cling to that which had robbed her, as people will. So they're showing that her father kept her from courting, kept her from having this relationship with other men. And now that she's lost her father, or the only man that she has had in her life, she can't let go of that and she feels lost. So this could be the start of that psychosis, or it could be the first manifestation of that psychosis. And then we get this line, she was sick for a long time. And I think it's interesting, we might assume that she was ill or she, maybe had the flu but when I think of she was sick, I think it is probably a depression. Maybe it was the psychosis coming out. And so that sick for a long time, I think that is more mentally sick than physically sick. When we saw her again, her hair was cut short, making her look like a girl, with a vague resemblance to those angels in colored church windows, sort of tragic and serene. So she has tried to make herself look younger. Maybe she's trying to re-experience her youth and start over to where she can now start dating or courting these men in order to have a relationship that her father had denied her. But again, is this logical or is she working off of her psychosis? The town really has trouble dealing with any type of mental illness. They have trouble defining what the mental illness is and how it's affecting other parts of her life. And then she buys the poison. And how does the town react? So the next day, we all said she will kill herself. And we said it would be the best thing. Do you see the problem that the town has with this, what they perceive to be psychosis or lack of dignity, justify suicide by saying that they justify it by saying this is better than hanging out with this northern laborer who she is not marrying. And here we see a clash between psychosis and social classes. We see that, again, the narrator is of maybe Miss Emily's generation, so grew up with her traditions and beliefs, and to see her not follow those traditions, it really leads to judgment. So we look at a line like this. They have called her family in because they want to stop this nonsense with hanging around with Homer, knowing that they're not going to get married. And it says, so she had bloodkin under her roof again. And we sat back to watch the developments. At first, nothing happened. Then we were sure that they were to be married. We learned that Miss Emily had been to the jeweler's and ordered a man's toilet set in silver, with the letters HB on each piece. 2 days later, we learned that she bought a complete outfit of men's clothing, including a nightshirt. And we said, they are married. We are really glad. We were glad because the two female cousins were even more Grierson than Miss Emily had ever been. And what does this mean, more Grierson? It could be that they were more uppity, they were more of that higher class, but it could also mean that they were crazier than she was. Another indicator of class is when her house began to stink. The younger generation wanted to do something about it. The younger generation said, it's simple enough, he said. Send her word to have her place cleaned up. Give her a certain time to do it, and if she don't, and then the older generation steps in. Damn it, sir, Judge Stevens said. Will you accuse a lady to her face of smelling bad? So this is out of the realm of their class. To accuse a lady, to accuse somebody who is of higher class of smelling bad. That would be a great offense to that person. Other indicators of class are when the men come to confront her about the taxes. And it says, so she vanquished them, horse and foot, just as she had vanquished their fathers 30 years before about the smell. So the smell happened and they were afraid to confront her about smelling bad, or her generation was afraid of that. And 30 years later, she is still maintaining that higher class, or this feeling that I am upper class and, this new generation's not going to tell me what to do. And then the final thing I want to note about class is the first line. When Miss Emily Grierson died, our whole town went to her funeral. So we see that they at least respect her station or her class enough to attend her funeral. So the whole town goes out of that respect. So if we piece together some of these elements of class, psychosis, gossip, narrator, what we see is that we see a situation in which her father has kept her more as a companion or a wife, pushing away all of her male suitors. This maybe caused the psychosis that came along after he died. She tries to make herself younger again. The town sees this happening. They know what's going on. They want her to either marry, or they say, we understand if you'll just take anyone. But when she does find somebody who is Homer, Homer Barron, he says he's not a marrying type. So she's found what might be a new companion, this time a proper companion whom she can marry. But what ends up happening is he says, I'm not the marrying type. I prefer to hang around with the guys than to get married and settle down. And I think this just exacerbates that psychosis. And it's interesting that she is running around with Homer. The people disagree with this. They don't like it. and they bring in her family to intervene. This is the point where she buys the poison. This is the point where she buys the toilet set. It's like she is already planning on killing Homer before he comes back. She is so afraid of losing him, or so afraid that more people are going to step in and break up this relationship, that she says the only way I can deal with it is to kill him and keep him here. And so we see the town being implicit in part of this in ignoring the psychosis that she's going through. And rather than getting her help for this relationship that she's had with her father, and now the relationship she's having with Homer, they try to take these men away from her. When she denies her father's dead, they come in and take him away from her. When she is hanging around with Homer, they send in relatives to take him away from her. And I think she just can't handle it anymore. And so she plans on killing him before he actually comes back. This is an interesting story, and there's a lot of little nuances that we could go through. I did want to keep this somewhat short. Hopefully, you enjoyed the story and those still yet to come.